Right, it's 21st of April 2023 and we're back in the wood. And I've wanted for some little time to talk again about standards. Standards and management of standards, and how standards inevitably affect hazel coppice. This is hazel coppice with oak standards. There are a few species of other trees of other species in here, such as this big one out the back here. See the way the branch pattern is totally different from the branch pattern in this oak. That's an ash, this one over here. There are more ashes over here and some sycamore. When the sycamore has in the past been coppiced, you see this group just over there, it's all multi-trunked, lots of littleish ones, that's been coppiced. But these oaks have not been coppiced. These are maidens. A maiden is a tree which has never been cut. And these are 200 something years old maybe. You've got to remember that a standard tree in active coppice actually grows more slowly than one out in open parkland, inverted commas, because it competes with the hazel and with the other species that grow alongside it in some instances for nutrients. And as you can see with this one, see this one in the far distance? That tree is what we call stag-headed. It is retrenched. So instead of being a big open crown, which in years gone by when the coppice was cut, the hazel was cut every 7 years or so, would have overshaded the hazel. Its branches would have hung over the hazel and then stunted the regrowth of the hazel. Because the hazel was allowed to go derelict and has grown up this high, the branches on the edge, the lower branches, have been shaded and they have died off. You can see some dead snags fairly low down in the canopy. So it has lost that and it has made compensatory growth. You see these branches in the middle have gone straight up. That's called retrenchment growth. And you can see that on a lot of the trees in this part of this wood, because they have been shaded and therefore stressed by the coppice. You see on this one, some of the side branches lower down have died off. And if we look up at the crown, the canopy, you can see that these trees, these are all English oaks. These are Quercus robur, one of two species of English oak. These have not got very much in the way of a leader. Other trees such as Turkey oak, introduced species, have a much stronger leader and they grow taller and straighter. But these ones seem to be happy to get above the level of the coppice and then go like an inverted umbrella and then get their competitive advantage and grow on and shade the coppice. And there's no doubt that they do shade the coppice. Once they get to this stage over here, about 200 plus years old, they grow more slowly on aggregate. They put on the same amount of growth each year, but it seems to add to the total growth and to the height of the tree much less, especially when they start doing retrenchment, which oak trees do throughout their lifetime from time to time. And that lifetime can extend 300, 400, 500 plus years, depending on what the life of that tree has been. We won't go into ancient pollards or ancient oaks on this particular video, which is all extemporaneous. It's coming straight out of my head, such as my head is. But I wanted to talk about managing hazel and oak standards in the context of hazel coppice. Hazel, of course, is your cash crop. Cut every 7 years, that gives you, the landowner, in brackets, cash flow. It also means that you can get a regular amount of income from a resource, your woodland. If you were to let this go longer derelict, see an area here which hasn't been cut yet, recut, this is derelict coppice, and the hazel coppice stalls are starting to cycle down, getting less stems on them, even though the individual stems may be larger, and some of the stems, like this little one over here, are starting to lose vigour. Eventually they'll start to die off, so the number of stalls and the number of stems per stall in your coppice will reduce. Now some people might say there are not very many standards in here. I would say that there are an adequate number of standards, but there are no waivers. A common figure that people bandy about for the number of standards per acre of hazel coppice with standards is 12. I believe that dates back to the ship laws of Henry VIII, who laid down by statute for the purposes of ensuring a timber supply for his navy, which was starting to dry up because of the rate at which he was building ships, mainly built out of oak, that for every standard tree that you cut, you must plant 12. This does not mean that 12 standards, trees of this size, perhaps with larger canopies, per acre is a good idea. I interpret this 12 per acre figure as a guide, and to include a smaller number of actual standards, i.e. trees in maturity, or perhaps over maturity if you're managing for nature conservation and not purely for timber, with a number of waivers which are basically the successors that will in time, over say 120 years or so, replace these as they get cut, and there's valuable timber in that, or they die off for various reasons. Okay, so what's a waiver? There aren't any in here, which is a bit of a long-term failing, but let's imagine. Come over here with me. Let's imagine that this tree here is a little bit straighter and is not a hazel, the last remaining stem on this stall, but is an oak. And you can see how the top of this, good with the eye of faith and being a bit straighter, which it never will be, will actually grow up and grow past this ash. If this was an oak of this size, this would be one of your waivers. A waiver is basically a tree which gets a stay of execution, or potentially gets a stay of execution, each time you do your coppicing, basically on a 7-year cycle, yeah? So you need a number of those, say 12, say 14, in your hazel coppice, pushed up like that. It won't cast too much shade, but there is a balance to be struck. If shade becomes too great and your coppice vigour starts to decline, then you might take out a number of your waivers. And also, if this was oak, that would be a nice usable size. A little bit fatter than that, you could use it as rails, say for fencing. So let's take a bit of a breather there, and I'll come back to you in a minute. Right, let's try and see if we can illustrate the shading effect that mature standards have on a woodland and on coppice. Okay, got an oak here, and on this side we've got a sweet chestnut, which in this part of this wood is relatively uncommon. But you can see that the canopies meet over the top. So although if you plot these on a map you get 2 little points, and say you could plot 12 of those within your acre of coppice or planned coppice, the actual effect of those is much larger than the point that the GPS position of the trunk would make. And you can also look over here and see that there are no coppice stalls just on the other side of the dead hedge in this area over here. And these nearest ones are notably smaller, with less stems than the ones further out. And if you look over here, you can see there's again fewer stems close in. There are some along the edge which were large, but Bambi's nibbled the hell out of them. So instead of looking like that, which they should do after the 4 seasons they've been growing, they're like that. And I really must get in here sometime soon and sort out the anti-deer fencing. I might have to go and buy some netting. which I don't like doing. Much rather use this rather than string up loads of plastic. Right, let's go and have a look at some other aspects. Right, I'm holding the camera level and I'm trying to hold it steady, and you can see what all the derelict coppice stems are doing. They're growing out at an angle. They're doing that because they're growing out towards the light. This is approximately north, looking this way. So in spite of the fact that there's more light in the southern sky, these are going towards the north, which suggests that they're pushed for light. All trees need light to make the best possible growth, and they will grow towards it to try and maximise that. But why are they leaning? Because the canopy of this tree here, which is that sweet chestnut, is casting shade and is forcing the ones nearest it to grow out towards the light, and that's having an effect on over all of these. So you can see that even though the edge of the canopy as it exists is here, it has a large effect on the woodland around it. You could argue that your hazel, cut every 7 years, is less affected. You can see this here is growing straight up. In fact, we'll go and look at a different part of the wood and see some more regrowth. Talk to you in a minute. Just show you this in passing. This is badger going in and out of this previous coppice cant underneath the Dorset gate. I'm going to have to do something about that. Otherwise Bambi will be able to get into here. Right, we're going to go in there and I'll talk to you when we're in. And I've found a bit that illustrates the next point I want to make. Just show you this in passing. I hadn't actually seen that because I've not been in here for months. This is badger foraging activity. And basically badger are making this track, which actually follows the track that I was using to take the cut material out on my mule. Right, talk to you again in a minute. We're going through there. Okay, this is a cant that I cut 5 winters ago. Sorry, 6 winters ago. So this has 5 seasons of growth. This is basically my eye level. I'm 5'8". This is looking slightly uphill, and that's how tall that's actually grown. That's 12-14 foot high, and that's doing rather nicely. And if you look over here, see there's a gap here underneath the shade of this sycamore stool. You can see how it's multi-trunked. This has been recut probably several times in its lifetime, and it's had severe deer damage. It's got broken tops, broken stems, dead stems. Sorry, not deer damage, grey squirrel damage, because there's a lot of damage up in the top. Of course deer can't reach that, but it's casting shade. This is the edge of the canopy here, but these stems here are growing nice and straight, so within the cycle for the hazel there's not too much issue with the shading. But once you sort of get closer in, you can see these are tall, and then as you get closer to the tree, although there's not much issue, especially from the nature conservation point of view, there is an issue in that your regrowth gets more sparse and gets shorter until you get right the way close, and that is still only about 6.5–7 foot high. So if you're hoping for someone to cut this at no cost, or to even buy this as standing crop, with this number of standards in here, you're on a hiding to nothing. So this is why you need to think that 12 mature standards per acre on hazel, which you need some kind of a commercial return from, or some kind of return at all, you're on a hide into nothing. If you're cutting this purely for nature conservation and you're adequately resourced to do it every 7 years, you can get a reasonable result. But in my 40 years of experience of working in nature conservation, managing woodlands, the resources are never going to be enough. Not to do the cutting, especially if you utilise volunteers, although they work very, very hard. The number of days that they're available for is limited, their numbers are limited, and the work is quite hard. And I don't believe that volunteers should be used or utilised for basic management. They should be used to put the cherry on the top of managing sites, to add value, add nature conservation value if you like, not the basic management. So you can see here, see how the line goes. This is shading. Let's go and have a, well, we'll stand here and talk about this standard over here. See if we can get a slightly different view of it. This is another oak standard. Similar age to all the others, 200 years old, maybe plus a bit. Oak, ash. The ash may die back in the next few years anyway. There again, they may not. Hopefully they won't. But ash dieback on the continent has apparently killed over 90% of the ash stock in the woodlands. So this is a nice conservation standard. You can see it's got retrenchment growth, it's got stag heading, it's cast branches all the way up, it's got holes in it, it's got a huge scar on this branch. There's a squirrel drake up there, past where my finger is, up there, in that fork, and there's probably rot going all the way down this branch, which has rendered it hollow. From a safety point of view, if this was by my house, I would start to be a little bit worried. But out in the woods, no problem at all. These are private woodlands, there are no footpaths underneath, no rights of way, so that can sit there. And from the point of view of things looking for niches within trees, such as hole nesting birds, such as insects which like rot holes and like the different conditions you get in different rot holes. They can be dry, they can be wet, they can change their moisture during the year. There's a lot of niches there and a lot of potential for wildlife. So this is a standard that I would probably like to keep if I had full say-so on the management of this site. And then I would think about removing one of these others. And also think about providing their successors. In common with a lot of woodlands in southern England, you've got the older trees, but there is very little in the way of seedling growth, and then saplings, which are sort of that sort of diameter and bigger, and waivers. So there's no continuity in the long term. We could talk about continuity of dead wood and mature and veteran tree resource in a totally another video, but here I'm just going to say, think about the number of standards in your wood. Please don't take 12 per acre as to mean you should have 12 large mature standards, such as this one here, or the one behind it, or even to include ashes. So 12 per acre is mature standards, and there should perhaps be 3 or 4, plus their successors, the waivers, and then, not counted in that 12 number, seedlings and saplings. And if you're not fencing against deer, how are you going to get natural regeneration to provide your seedlings and saplings? Do you plant in? Do you then put them in tubes? And there's a whole nother video potentially about that. Right, my voice is giving out, and my energy levels are giving out. I hope that made sense. I'm going to walk back and go home for some kip. I've already had a siesta today. Moan, complain, gripe. Thank you for listening.